Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Growth Vertical. Today we have another special guest here, specifically for you guys on talking a bit about the SEO side of things. And it's Damon Burton from SEO Nation, which is a 15-year-old SEO agency. Damon's actually been featured in publications including Entrepreneur Magazine, Forbes, BuzzFeed, and USA Weekly. And he's helped big clients as well as small clients make more in a month than people generally used to do in a year by predominantly using SEO tactics uh, when you compete again on an already established market out there. It's important to also note that Damon has grown a number of smaller businesses or number of businesses in total, including the Inc. 5000 that are included in the Inc. 5000 and Shark Tank businesses as well. So what's crazy is that Damon has helped grow businesses in an unprecedented time, such as times of recession and even times of COVID. So today we're going to be talking about the story of how you beat $1 billion company on Google, and we're joined by Damon Burton. Say hi, Damon, to talk about this.
Yeah, what's up, Neil? I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and your audience. These will be some fun topics.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. There's been a wealth of obviously experience that you've showcased online and of course multiple communities. So it's going to be exciting to sort of dive into that sort of info on how you can actually tackle the issue. We all experience, whether we're marketers in general, business owners, or even aspiring marketers right in the future. But yeah, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here. Before we get into it, I kind of wanted to hear a bit about yourself and wanted everyone else to learn a bit about you. So where did it sort of start with? Where did it all start with Damon Burton and also SEO National? Like, what was the motivation?
Yeah, there's a lot of stories along the journey. So maybe I'll give you the abbreviated background, and then there's a dozen paths we can take from there. So even the abbreviated background has lots of stories. So it'll be a medium length reply. I'll try to not keep it super long. So my background was originally in web design, so that's how I started to kind of understand this environment. But where I started to evolve it into a career was in my 20s. I had a car enthusiast website. I was big into cars at the time. And so I built up a community that started to attract thousands of followers. And that's where I said, well, how do I make this better? And that's when I started to understand design more. And then as it continued to grow, I said, how do I monetize this? And that's when I started to look into marketing. So I did that on the side for a couple of years, picked up a couple side clients. And then where it fully started to transition into a career was my former employer got shut down. So they got into some legal trouble. And at that point, I had three decisions. So I could either wait to see if I got a paycheck from them, I could go find another day job, or I could take the side clients that I had and bet on myself and turn that into entrepreneurship opportunity. So I chose number three. And there's good, that's good and bad and scary because I was cutting my income in half by doing that. But at the time, my wife and I were newly married. We didn't have any kids yet, and we had a house payment and a car payment. And I did the math, and with her job and my now half income, we could still pay the bills. And so that seemed like a pretty calculated risk, probably as safe as I would get. So that's when I chose to invest in myself and start doing the solo entrepreneurship thing. Now, where it started to turn into SEO was one of my design clients said, what do you know about Google? And I told them, I know enough that I can probably help you, but I don't know enough that I feel comfortable charging you. But I also don't want to work for free. So this is a good, for new entrepreneurs, here's a possible opportunity, a possible arrangement that you can offer for your clients too to get more clients. So what I said is, how about I do work for free in the beginning, but let's agree upon these goals. And if I hit these goals, then you owe me retroactively, and we start a retainer. So I ended up hitting the goals. They paid me in reverse, and then we started a monthly contract. And after I had success with that, I enjoyed the process. And so I took it to another client who knew the first client. So I said, hey, client number two, you remember client number one? Here's what the arrangement I just did with them. Do you want to do the same thing? And they said yes. And we had success again. And at that point, I said, I enjoy the process of SEO, so I'm going to stick to SEO. So that's how I got my first two clients. And, we're actually coming up on our 17th year. And so 17 years later, I still have those 2 clients 17 years later. So, there's a lot of other stories in between there that we can go into, but I think that last one is important for newer entrepreneurs because it creates an opportunity where you can establish relationships and trust, and then you can give a no risk opportunity for your clients, but you also have incentive to perform, and then it can turn into a profitable arrangement after that. And then once you start to get a handful of clients and you deliver for them, then they tend to refer more clients, and those clients refer more clients, and then from there it just continues to grow. So that's kind of the shorter answer of how I got into it.
Shorter, but it's pretty exciting from the sounds of it. Like there must have been, I guess there must have been a change of emotion throughout the entire journey, right? So you obviously were left at a couple of crossroads and you had to sort of decide, like you mentioned. Um, I I know that you have a book, right, that you
Mm-hmm.
focus sort of released, and it would just tell the audience a bit about that. But I kind of wanted to ask you quickly. So based off of your journey, would you find that it helped that you were doing it specifically with SEO, or do you sort of say that hey, you should niche down in the beginning for those that are marketing right now, or those founders that are trying to career, or should they focus on offering or working on a whole set of functions like SEO and social media and you know paid whatever it is that they're trying to work with?
Yeah, I would definitely pick one. Now the exception to that is when you're in the beginning, you have to pay your bills and put food on the table. So if somebody has an opportunity for you, and it's a choice between, financial stress, then that's a little bit of a different story. And so sometimes you have to take a client that maybe if you had a little more cash flow, you wouldn't take. So ideally, you get to a position where you have the flexibility to start saying no, and there's lots of value in that. For me, I stuck to SEO, but I didn't niche down even further. I didn't become just the lawyer SEO or just the doctor SEO or the dentist SEO. And that's my emotions around that has evolved over the years. In the beginning, I felt overwhelmed as if I had an obligation to figure out what my niche was. And so I was always trying to think, well, which industry do I like, or which type of businesses do I like? And over the years, I couldn't find the answer. And so I would just tell myself, all right, well, we'll just keep going. We'll keep going. We'll have more clients and we'll fill it out. And then, so in the beginning, it was kind of stressful, but now have a big enough operation that it's become an advantage because now we're not known as the dentist SEOs. And so we can take clients from any industry. And we've built out processes that we can apply to any industry. That's a really important thing is when you start doing SEO is you have to document your processes because as you grow, you need to start giving some of those tasks to other people so you can continue focusing on the growth or focusing on the things that you like to do, and your team members will be as good or as bad as the documentation you can provide them. And what's interesting is nowadays I think documentation is our team's superpower, and we've been looking into acquiring other SEO agencies, and the most common issue I see other agencies admit that they have problems with is they don't have standard operating procedures. They don't have documented processes. And that's their biggest pain point. So if you focus on whether it's SEO or paid ads or design, whatever it is, pick one because it becomes easier to maintain quality control as you scale, which provides a better reputation, which delivers better results, which brings more clients. And it's also less stressful because you're focusing on one thing. I think we've all at one point taken the one client that we didn't want to work on, but the money was attractive. And then a couple months later, we regretted it. So in the beginning, take what business you can or try different types of opportunities to see which ones you appreciate more. But over time, you really should decide and focus on which area of fulfillment that you find the most enjoyment out of.
Yeah, I agree. Even myself, I've done that where you started off as a project and somehow you kick off the relationship in a very good way. So you feel initially you took it on as, hey, this is exciting, the money's exciting, so you might as well do it.
Mm-hmm.
Then when you build a relationship, you almost feel obligated to sort of go see it through, right? So you're actually going for, hey, let's go and have this package in place with the client, and we're still delivering that, of course. And then later down the line, you realize, hold on, I didn't even want to do this in the first place,
Yeah.
but you still feel sort of almost guilty, but also almost bad that you're having to do it as well. So yeah, that's never good. So it's a good way of, I guess, finding your way, finding your feet. But yeah, instead of veering off, it'd be good to if you could tell everyone about the book. Like, what's the name of the book, and why should they why is it important to read, especially in this current age? Because I'm guessing there's some, from my understanding of the book, there was a lot of processes in there anyway,
Hmm.
and how you sort of help those smaller businesses actually do champion SEO basically.
Yeah, I wrote the book because I got tired of seeing all the inaccurate information and the crap that was out in the SEO world. One thing I've realized with SEO is there's a lot of outdated content that's on the internet about SEO, and it's because it's been optimized, so
Yeah.
it ranks well. But a lot of times it doesn't get updated as the world of SEO changes, and so I started writing it because I the main reason is I wanted to help out smaller businesses. And so, yes, of course, there's an opportunity for me to say, hey, I'm an author and I can use it for credibility. And that's been great. And we can maybe talk about that next. But I really wrote it because I was frustrated with the industry and I was annoyed. And so I wanted to be able, when I talked to a lead that was a smaller business that maybe didn't have the budget to work with us, I could still help them because I could go, look, if you don't have the money, but you have the time, here is a blueprint. And so when I wrote it, it is my agency's processes, and then I reverse engineered it into a generalized approach. So nearly anybody that reads it could apply it to their industry. And then as I wrote it, I have the book right here. And what's funny is, like, in the intro, there's a sentence that says, let's be honest, a book about SEO doesn't sound like the sexiest topic. So that's the first sentence in the book. And because of that, I wanted to acknowledge that, hey, and it goes on to explain more, there will be some technical information in the book. And so I wanted to set realistic expectations. But the book starts with story. So it talks about how we briefly talked about how I was into cars and how I got into it. And then it talks about the evolution of my involvement and the growth of the agency. And there's lots of fun stories. One of them is beating the billion dollar company. And so I started going, look, here's what's possible, and here's how to understand that in fun stories. But then through it, you realize, oh, that's a lesson there, and there's a lesson there, and there's an opportunity there. And so it eases into the technical explanations. And so anybody should be able to pick it up and start from the beginning. But then I also didn't want to bore the people that might be a little more advanced. And so the stories help the beginners, but they also transition more of the experts into the technical stuff. So it is a book that mostly anybody could pick up and go, oh, okay, now I understand how to apply SEO or the concepts of it.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I think we can dive into that a bit more, right? So, you know, going straight into the beast, I would say, what's the story, right, behind how you beat the billion-dollar company on Google for their own brand? Maybe, how did you figure that out? What was the situation initially of you figuring that out?
It started totally by accident. It started kind of definitely a funny story. So this was the year before I started my agency. So I was learning SEO and applying it to my own website. So I had started a few websites, and my wife would watch The Bachelor. So it's this dating show, and from what I remembered in previous season finales, they would leave a cliffhanger. They wouldn't tell you who the next Bachelor was going to be, and they'd say come back in a couple of weeks. Well, this time they said come back after the break, after the commercials, and we're going to tell you who the Bachelor is. And so I'm sitting there watching this finale with my wife, and the entrepreneur in me starts wondering, they had, if they're going to explain they're going to disclose who the guest is now instead of a couple of weeks, that has to be on purpose. That's not an accident. So why are they doing it on purpose? So I'm trying to understand the marketing behind this change that they made in this show. And then they come back from the commercial and they announce who the gentleman is. And I'm trying to figure out why they're talking about this guy sooner than later. And I could find very little information on the internet about him. And so here I am, somebody that doesn't really watch the show, that knows search engines, and I can't find anything. So I get thinking, if I can't find anything and I understand how to look for things, just imagine all these other people that don't know how to use search engines and they love the show. They can't find anything. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to go in the other room and I'm going to build a website. I'm going to gather what information I could find about this guy, and I'm going to put together a fan site. And so I go in the other room. I spent about 90 minutes And I built up this website for a gentleman named around a gentleman named Andy Baldwin. And on it, I put, unofficial fan site, and I put whatever pictures I could find. I put what information I could find, and then I optimized it. So I did everything I knew at the time, started adding content, started making technical updates to the website. And within a few weeks, I started getting a lot of traffic. And then I started to optimize it further, add more content. And by the end of the month, I had put ads on it and was making several thousands of dollars per month in passive income, because the website for The Bachelor, which is run by a company called ABC, a $1 billion company, I ended up outranking their site for The Bachelor.
That's a the thing is, I've come across the show as well, so I know that it's a well-received show. A lot of people love watching it, and I think it's actually gone as an international audience, not just
Mm-hmm.
it's to outrank a site like that. Did you manage to do it on a localized across like almost multiple continents?
So at the time, so I didn't really watch the show. My wife, she asked me to come sit with her on the finale.
Yeah.
So I wasn't super familiar with it. So it was optimized for the US audience. Yeah. What was funny is when I realized that I could do that, I could leverage other people's audiences. I started to think about how I could do that in other ways. So then the next year I did it on The Bachelor again, but then they started to catch on. So now they started to have websites ready, and then as soon as they announced them, then they published the websites.
Uh,
So I did that for 2 years, but then I started to do it in other industries too. There's a huge car convention in Las Vegas in the U.S. Called SEMA, and SEMA is about what's the newest cars coming out, what's the newest technology. It's a 3 or 4 day event. It's massive. And I started to go to this event, and it's such an amazing, if you're into cars, it is the biggest event you can go to, where you can see luxury cars, innovative technologies, all sorts of crazy things. And so when you leave it, it's so fascinating that you want more, but it's only for 3 or 4 days once a year. So it's very similar to The Bachelor. I got online and started to look up, where can I see more pictures of SEMA, just all these amazing cars. And there was just a little site here and a little site there. So then I had taken, I don't know, 100 pictures the first year. So I started a website and created a gallery, and I created a website called SEMA Gallery. And then by the second year, I said, okay, I'm going to do with SEMA what I did to Bachelor. So when I went back the second year, I took, I think, like 800 photos. And then the third year, I took 3,000 photos. But by the second year, when I had enough photos for me to optimize and create content around, I outranked SEMA as well. And so I was able to take, for the listeners, where the opportunity in this story is, pay attention to different markets and pay attention to things you like, pay attention to the markets of your customers. The reason why these two websites ranked really well is because I solved a problem. And what the problem I solved was a need for content about them, like dedicated content about those things. So when you focus on what the needs of your audience or your customer's audience is, a lot of times ignore what your competition is doing and look at what they're not doing. And that's often an opportunity to create an SEO strategy around it.
do you think that we look at SEO and content marketing very differently? So, do you think that it's wildly misunderstood almost these days? Because there's a ton of content out there, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
almost feels like a rinse and repeat type model, where everyone's either regurgitating what the other person, and especially with
Yeah.
tools like ChatGPT and AI tools popping up, right? Where you have writers, etc. Then they're shortening the content writing process, but surely sacrificing the, I guess, the initial need that you're talking about, right? So they're almost skipping that step
Mm-hmm.
and going for, hey, maybe there's a what is a SEO key phrase that we need to rank for. Let's just write for that using AI, shorten it, and that's it. Like, we're publishing, and that's what we're trying to rank for. But they don't think about why the target audience of theirs is searching for what is SEO in the first place and trying to build content around that, right?
Yeah.
So do you think it's wildly misunderstood still?
By a large portion, yes. I wouldn't say everybody, but by probably the majority. And it's for the reasons you mentioned. So this is a great topic. The problem that most other agencies have that serve their clients, or the problem that most other agencies have that try to rank for their own thing, or webmasters try to rank for their own thing, is they skip the buyer intent. They skip the research. And so they go into this thing where it's like, as you said, chat GPT. Um, and then they're just like, I want to rank for this. And then it spits out content. But why are you writing that content? Why are you using that content? You have to understand the intent. And what you want to do is get in front of the existing intent that implies buyer intent, because you don't want to rank for just anything. Like a really great example is, I don't do any SEO to rank for the word SEO. Me as an agency would never want to rank for the word SEO. Why? Because it's other SEO searching SEO. Or even if we eliminate all the other agencies, which is going to be the majority of the people searching SEO, which are people that are not leads for me, the people that remain, what about SEO? What do they want to know? Maybe they want to learn it on their own too. Maybe they want to optimize their own site. So you have to be really careful about the phrases and the intent that the phrases mean. So like when we launch an account, we spend 4 to 6 weeks just looking at data. And in that data, we go, okay, what are people already asking? Then we go one step further. As we identify all the questions, we say, which of these questions means they want to buy the thing? So just because it shows up doesn't mean we want to optimize for it, because it might not be the right customer. Like a really good example is one of our first clients was they do electronic manufacturing. So they take circuit boards and assemble them in a way for things like cell phones, computer screen monitors, and they were spending 80% of their budget on the word printed circuit board. But when we looked into the buyer intent, they don't sell printed circuit boards. They use them in their product, but they don't sell that as an individual product. And so they were spending 80% of their budget on a thing that they don't sell, attracting people that can't buy from them. But it sounds really close. So the only difference for them, instead of targeting the phrase printed circuit board, where their money is printed circuit board assembly. One word made all the difference. And so you need to look at what the words mean. And then one step further, is that also a meaning that implies that somebody wants to buy what you offer? So focus on solving the pain points of your customers, because that's what's going to get their foot in the door. And then also by helping them, that's what creates a subconscious relationship, which makes them trust you to want to buy what you offer.
Yeah, with my process, every single time we onboard in a project and we know that someone's not done any, and I call it base SEO optimization of a website, right? They don't have much content, but they're not using the right term to showcase to almost match intent. And so they're like, oh, but we want to rank for, I don't know, let's say marketing analytics, something very so broad, right now
Mm-hmm.
because us. Um, but they don't look at, hey, I want to rank for just marketing like they look at, I want to rank for just marketing analytics, but they never look at the thing for like, oh, rephrase that's higher intent, so it's marketing analytics software, but for like for I don't know, let's say for banks, right, or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. Sometimes there is some or very, very little, but even though it's good month, they are the highest intent forms of keywords that you can optimize for, especially if you focus on that target market wide. I mean, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but I found that you always get essentially a much more better quality influx of leads over time
Mm-hmm.
when you optimize for the lower volume keyword, of course, and also for the highest intent. So I usually look at intent. Then I take those terms and put them into their own like sort of commercial brackets, topic clusters as well. They're intent buckets, I call them. And
Mm-hmm.
then from there, we look at how you can create the piece of content that matches up to that serves up to that intent. So, oh, do we need to speak in a certain way because they're asking these particular questions, which leads to marketing analytics software for banks,
Yep.
and maybe why you're the best one versus but yeah, it's wildly misunderstood, and I don't actually spend most of my time doing SEO because I know how time consuming it can become, but it's not as time consuming if you do it the right way. Um,
Yeah.
so, and there are a lot of companies out there that are acting as media brands nowadays. Like they produce content like LinkedIn, they produce content on their blog sites, YouTube, you name it. But how do you feel like there's a disadvantage to those smaller businesses if you're competing against a media brand, essentially, a company that's pumping out content almost all the time about anything?
It's not a for certain yes or no. It could be, but you bring up a good point about the intent. And so even if you're competing, let's combine two topics, kind of the media brand versus, or in addition to the intent, because the media brands generally go against, they target everything, right? They go for all sorts of keywords. But if you focus on, as you explained, the more specific phrases, uh, then what you find is the higher conversion rate, because you find somebody you attract a more specific audience that needs a more specific thing, which is your thing. So a really simple example is, would you rather have 1,000 visitors that are too broad and you get 0 out of 1,000 conversions, or would you rather have 10 people and 7 out of 10 convert? So it's not about the total volume of the search queries. So we don't even really use the volume. We'll look at it, but not so much to make a decision on what we target, but we'll look at it to set expectations after we've already decided what to target. So what you can look at is you can look at more of the intent, look at which phrase is better aligned with your ideal buyer, better aligned with the product or service that you offer. Then after that, we'll look at the volume to go, okay, this one's more or less competitive. So we don't necessarily use it to make a decision. We use it more to set expectations with our clients to say, this one's more competitive than that one.
Yeah, and I think there's something else that's interesting as well, and it's the gaps that you mentioned. So looking at those key phrases that people are in. But do you think people should steer away from the terms that just are non-existent according to market analytics tools, so like SEO tools specifically? Because there's so many cases, and I'm sure you run into this as well, Damon, where you've gone onto SEM, run onto a that comes up in your meeting, but does like so in some discovery calls maybe, but it don't come up on SEO, they have zero volume, or like they're not applicable yet because they just don't have a 10, which is a month for according to worth writing content for those ones that aren't being searched, or do you think you should turn away somewhat?
Yeah, so it cut out there for a minute, but I think I got the question. So correct me if I'm wrong in my reply. So for the same reason, we don't necessarily look at the search volumes. Um, I think the data is wildly inaccurate, and I think it's underreported. And there's also some statistics from years ago that say that it is underreported. And I don't remember the years, but like if you look at when you could use Google's keyword planner and it would show volumes. So years ago, pretty much anybody could access that. And then it became something like you had to have an account with a card on file. So you didn't have to necessarily spend money, but you had to have an account that looked like it would potentially spend money. And then what they evolved it to was the accuracy of the data would depend on your budget. So all of a sudden you'd start to get, if you used keyword planner, let's say you had a word that said, before it used to be really specific, and it would say this gets between 850,000 and 1 million searches per month. Well, now it says something like between 50 and 1 million results. It's so broad that it's worthless. And so we don't really look at those. And I'm glad you brought up the ones that even show 0, because a lot of times we'll look at a phrase and with 100% certainty that that thing gets searched more than 10 times per month. It's like 10 is a default number in all of these keyword reporting tools. So I don't look at that. Kind of similar to what we said just before is we might look at that to better understand the level of competition, but we don't necessarily use that as a deciding factor if we want to target it. Because at the end of the day, if there's a phrase that is very specific, that is exactly the buyer that we want to buy the product that we offer, then that's going to have a huge conversion rate for the few times that people search it. So what you want to do is focus on the things that drive sales and high conversions more than the broad things to just say, hey, I'm on page 1 just because I'm on page 1. But if nobody's buying it, who cares?
Yeah, It's a debate always. It's a big debate, right? Even when you're, and I don't know if you experience this with prospects, but even when you're having a, hey, why are we even going after this? We can clearly see that the data says SEO, SEO analytics searches, must be 500 versus a measly SEO, like non-existent. But you think
Mm-hmm.
about it and you're saying, hey, well, I heard it in our client calls, you've heard it in customer in these recorded calls. Like, how are these people actually asking anything about them? And
Mm-hmm.
it's most of the time, it's not what you think. It's not the search engine thinks.
Yeah.
I've even found that running surveys, like we have linked, we can ask industry essentially leaders of how do they phrase this issue, or how do they, and what you is you just, you've used this before, but you hit like a type poll, and then you get them to qualitatively write it in, and that at the end gives you the signals. You should write it in with phrasing. More people are going to find you if you use the term that you thought you were optimizing for. Um, yeah, it's a question that happened almost comes up every day, and yet we're on
Mm-hmm.
the battle of how do we convince the party that it's not a good idea to go for those highly voluminous terms, generic terms that we see has volume, but the ones that are the key indicators, but they have zero volume on that.
Yeah. It becomes a process of education, where what we've done to solve that problem is we've found that transparency and honesty ends up solving all the problems. And so when you explain to them, just like we've had in this discussion, where it's like, okay, sure, yeah, we'll go after those. If you here's what I do is I let the customers decide, and I put the liability on them, because in this example that you're talking about, we could say, okay, great, well, let's go after, we have keyword A, which is broad and has lots of searches, or keyword B, which has smaller volume but very specific buyer intent, and that implies a higher conversion rate. So, customer, if you'd like, I will target A, but you must know that that's going to drive a lot of irrelevant traffic. You're going to spend more time on the phones taking the leads that aren't going to convert, and it's going to increase the traffic for people that don't buy. So, it's going to increase your abandonment rate and your bounce rate, which is going to negatively affect the reputation of your website. I will target that if you would like me to. And then, as soon as the decision is on them, they don't want to be responsible for it, right? And so then you solve both problems. So you educate them, and you also create a circumstance where they can't come back to you and say, this is your fault. And so education is a huge part of the process. And when I talked about these two clients that I were my first SEO clients, and I'm still with me 17 years later, the client retention, when you educate your clients, it increases your retention too. So it increases conversions and it increases retention. Because when you communicate to clients, one of the biggest problems I see with SEO agencies is they don't explain why it takes so long. And I imagine a lot of newer agencies, a big problem they have is, I don't know how to close this deal, because as soon as I tell the client it's going to take a year, they're like, screw that. I don't want to wait a year. I can do paid ads tomorrow. So but what you're missing is explaining why it takes a year. Well, as soon as you do that, then they're educated and they trust you, because you were honest and you said, this part sucks, and I'm going to tell you why it sucks. Because so few people are exposed to an honest salesperson that says, look, here are the advantages of SEO, but also here are the disadvantages. And as soon as you share that vulnerability, that makes you so much more credible. So what we do is we educate them on the sales calls, and we say, here's the good, here's the bad. The only bad is that it takes a lot of time, but here's why. And then we explain, it takes 1 to 2 months just to update your site structure and go through all the data and understand where we're going to find your money and which words we're going to target. Then once we find which words we're going to target, it takes time to create the content, publish it, distribute it. So we could be 4 months in and we just barely got out a handful of articles. And so if you stop at 6 months, you just burned money for 6 months. I tell them everything. because now they know. And then if they convert, then they also know they have realistic expectations, which solves one of the other biggest problems of agency owners is the client calling them every week, every month and going, why haven't we grown? Why haven't we progressed? Where are our sales? That also goes away because you told them before they signed up that this takes time. Now, don't stop there. Once you explain it in the sales calls, put it in the agreement. I have a whole page in our agreement that say, I have 2 full pages. One page says, here are average timelines. And in it says, month 1 is this, month 2 is this, month 3 is this. And then it repeats after that. It's a big content play after that. Then the other page I have after that is a full page that the title in really large letters says, here are reasons not to hire us. And then in it says, don't tell us what to do. Don't expect quick results. You don't get my cell phone number, so don't bug me on the weekends. Don't bug me after hours. You can email me when you have a question. My team's always available within business hours. Like all the things that you're afraid to do are the best things that you can do to sell somebody.
Yeah, I think the implementation time was one of the aspects I wanted to really talk about, especially with your story earlier. It's not like with The Bachelor, what you implemented was a short-term strategy, right? It is that we don't have to, that we can start ranking for this site in a couple of weeks. You see that, but then that's because there's not already something out there for that, right? Whereas there's going to be, I think, what is it, like content is king, of course they say, but then we ask ourselves, are all topics going to be the same? And it's like, no, that's not the case. So I've had that as well, right, where someone has actually gone ahead and signed on, the expectation was set at the start, but then slowly I realized over time that they were almost ignoring been said. And it's almost like a relationship where you're saying, hey, this was great, but I don't think this is going to work. And I do think that more people should be okay with saying that, because it's the whole managing expectations, right? So at that time, I remember they were expecting those quick results as a part of the roadmap. 6 months, 7 months later, actually it was 6 months, and it's like, this is not part of the map. But then they almost acting as if we were burning money, and it was like, no, not burning money.
Mm-hmm.
You're burning money if you say no, if you don't let me do what we're supposed to. But yeah, no, I do agree. Do you think it's a long-term game? Is where I'm getting at, and I guess that brings us into the conversation of getting sales for free versus using paid advertising. So, do you think that SEO should be implemented as a long-term strategy?
Generally speaking, yes, because the logistics behind updating a website, identifying the proper content strategy, and then creating and drafting the content, that just takes time. I mean, to do it right, I couldn't imagine you being able to update a website structure, identify where the money is in the market, create a content calendar, and start writing your first batches of content in less than like 6 weeks if you're doing it thoroughly and deeply and effectively. Now, this kind of ties into what you were saying earlier about ChatGPT. Um, you can obviously create more content at scale, but the thing you have to understand is what we've been talking about is about buyer intent, and are you creating the right content? And a lot of
Yeah.
people are taking advantage of these AI tools and creating quantity content instead of quality. And what you have to understand is this concept is not new for search engines. And so ChatGPT is new, but before that was Jasper. Is ChatGPT better? Yes, a lot better. But the concept of creating content at scale without as much intent and quality control is not new. And we can go all the way back to 2011 when Google came out with the Panda algorithm update. That algorithm was about websites that were stealing, scraping, and spinning content. So the idea of repurposed content, which is basically what ChatGPT currently is, because it's taking content that it's cataloged from a large source of data and then deciding how to repurpose it. So there's been content repurposing tools and strategies for 2 decades. It's a little bit trickier now for Google to catch up to the scale of it, but the concept is not new. And there's I think the advantages to ChatGPT are obvious, but where people are overlook it is the advantages in what's left over in applying a personality, because you can apply content at scale, but it's a lot harder to be authentic and tell a story in that content if you're skipping over that buyer intent. So there's a huge opportunity for the people that optimize websites to take the time to do the research to understand the buyer intent and better align their content with the personality. Because if you think about all the major brands that have been successful for decades, if not a century, like if we look at mega corporate international brands, I don't know, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, things like that, they're not out there mass producing content at scale. They're telling stories. And it's a lot harder to tell a story with ChatGPT than it is to connect with your audience and share an authentic story. So there's a huge opportunity for the people that take the time to tell stories and create brand loyalty.
Yeah, I agree. And in the B2B space, been talking a lot about the whole lead generation aspect versus demand generation, of course. And it's not something that was never there. I think we, as marketers, it tends to be just a buzzword or a fancy word for something that's just been invented or recycled, So it's like ABM. It's like no one was really ABM was always I guess, a strategy put in place where you just on your marketing, right, rather than being so broad brush. These days, I do think that we have a company, for example, called John Lewis, who you may have heard of. They do a bunch of these sort of, well, like homeware and that sort of thing, home appliances, and that it's pretty cool. But they offer a bunch of stuff. But I remember the big supermarkets, the same way like an Asda, that's all. Um, companies like this would release. It was a Christmas period, and they'd release a ad, right? The ads paid for within the ad, the most impactful thing that it probably linger for like the next years to come. You say, "Oh, do you remember the ad to
Mm-hmm.
Chris?" And it was nothing to do with we want to rank for the highest supermarket in the world or anything, like the best supermarket in the world or anything. It was simply what do they offer and how are they offering it, and they spent a bunch on the store itself, and they spent some additional money on actually distributing. So you can tell that the value was actually in the initial research process, which I think should be the same for both content and SEO. I usually say the same thing. I was like, SEO will come when you get the right set of content created for your business, right? It's something that the market will always move toward at one point. And there is SEO types of content you might want to focus on after you've covered all the high intent. You just want traffic, but, but until you know to go. So I think you could use aspect in tandem so that you can sort of reap the most rewards from it.
Yeah, that's a great point. With the storytelling, it can be an organic or paid ad. So to your point, the most memorable paid ads have been ones that you tell stories. So whatever, whether it's the holidays or major sports events, the ads that you remember are the ones that tell stories for sure.
Yeah. And do you think that I know that with SEO, because we talked about it taking some time when you do it properly, especially, um, do you think that they should be used, part paid ads and SEO should be used almost support one another? So whilst SEO is ramping up, you should be doing activity to sort of get your brand out there soon. And then over time, you can see the shift where you decrease your spend on the SEO side, um, sorry, on the paid side, but you increase your activity on the SEO side.
It depends on the industry and the client. There's not an answer that applies to everybody, because in some industries it could be use paid ads to get your initial visibility, and then as SEO kicks in, you can slowly decrease and phase out your paid ads. But the thing you got to think about is, like, if paid ads are working, then do them. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So if paid ads are working, run paid ads. If email is working, do email. If social media is working, do social media. A lot of these marketers get in and they throw rocks at other forms of marketing, and the other one's evil. But if it works and pays for itself and drives a profit, then do whichever of those are driving a profit. But in general, yes, if you're a newer brand, you have the potential to get visibility quicker with paid ads. Generally, it has a smaller profit margin. But then when the SEO kicks in, this is a great example of earlier where we're talking about setting expectations with clients. So the way that I explain it to them, or the client that says, well, why would I wait a year to do SEO when I can do paid ads tomorrow? Then you can say, that's great. Yes, go do paid ads. But what's going to happen is, we'll just make up numbers here. Do you want to spend $5,000 a month on paid ads and have a 10 to 20% return? Or do you want to spend $5,000 a month on SEO, but you won't make any money back for 9 to 12 months? And then after 9 to 12 months, you start to break even. And then after that, instead of only selling $5,000, you're selling 15 to 50 grand or $100,000. So SEO has a wild card where it has a much higher potential profit margin. So eventually you get to a point where paid ads and SEO cross and intersect each other, where the profit margins are significantly different. So it just depends. Like if you have more time than money, then do paid ads. Or if you're willing to invest the time or the money into SEO, then it usually has the higher profit margin, and it's more sustainable and more scalable once it kicks in. Because when you look at paid ads, it's funny, the people that are really heavy into paid ads that hate on SEO, all the things that they complain about, I think the opposite. Because a lot of these people will say, well, SEO is complicated and the algorithm is always changing. Well, the algorithm is always changing, but if you do it right, I'm not always reacting to those changes. As long as you do SEO efficiently and morally, generally every time there's an algorithm update, my clients are positive or neutral. And I've never had a client in 17 years get a penalty. But if you compare that to paid ads, that stuff's changing every day. I'm not in looking at my accounts every day. I'm not looking at what ads got approved and declined. I'm not looking at which ones where the budget is now too high or too low. And so a lot of the arguments that people say about paid ads, I find the opposite. And I find the SEO is easier than those problems with paid ads.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say one of the biggest, I guess one of the ones that scare, one of the things that scare a lot of people is the how do we keep up with SEO because it's changing often. But I think if you start phasing in black hat tactics, there's a short term burn your domain, or you're just going to it's going to cause a negative, a net negative on the entire process, right? So it's important to stick out with those white hat tactics, make sure you continue delivering. I know it sounds cliche, but delivering value. It's kind of a used phrase right now, but
Mm-hmm.
just actually producing the content that's going to have an impact on your funnel and on your prospective buyers and their journeys, right? What are the questions are they asking? What are the important ones they need answered? Focus on content, because anything that you try to get a shortcut from or something like that, that's going to burn you. And I think that was one of the things I was going to ask you. So covered it actually quite organically because it's hand in hand. But yeah,
Yeah. I mean, in my mind, SEO can be simplified to three categories. So the first category is how good or bad is your website built? So is it mobile friendly, quick page load, good user experience? The second is content. You can only rank for what Google can read. So do you clearly communicate why you're an expert in whatever it is that you sell? And then the third is external credibility. Do other websites mention your brand, link to your website? So most of your visibility is going to come from the latter two, the content credibility, but that will only be effective if you have a solid built website for all those efforts to reflect off of. So when we start talking about, content and things like that, or, long-term algorithms, the algorithms as they get introduced, they still apply to those same three categories. So maybe let's look at an example or two. Back in 2016, it was mobile-geddon and everything's mobile first. But if you look at the mobile first movement in the algorithm, it's basically which website loads the quickest that I can navigate the easiest on a smaller resolution device. And so that is just that first category, site structure, good page speed and good user experience and design. And then, now we got voice. But when you look at voice, there's no SEO or webmaster on the other side recording answers in a microphone in audio and voice. What's happening is it's just voice is an input mechanism. And then Google says, okay, we got a voice question. Now let's find which website can we find the quickest. So site structure that has the answer to what we want, content. that has a website that we trust, external credibility. So all these algorithm updates are still just the same three core concepts, and that may change in the future. But in the 17 years I've been involved, every single algorithm update is one or a combination of those same three things.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because there was a conversation I was having recently around the whole chat GPT function, and a lot of people are saying, hey, well, at one point you're going to be using that for search. It's going to spit out an answer from the person that had the best SEO almost, and
Yeah.
we'll get their answer shown. And I don't think that's entirely true. It's more about, I think, important as well mentioned, uh, as ability piece, and then also on top of that, do you get to the point, right? And do you have a great backing of content to go talking that person, sort of, I guess, answering the questions that someone else might have. Do you do you think that people should focus on like a certain aspect of SEO in the beginning? So, i.e., like sticking out gaps in their funnel. Or do you think the process on how you should work it from start? That's the startup we're talking about, right? Um, in the beginning, do you think there's just one thing that they should always start with, or do you think that there's actually make to start somewhere else? Like, oh yeah, let's just this content.
So I'll give two answers. The first answer is where we always start as an agency. We always start with site structure. So when when we launch a new account, we have two things that happen. One is the development side of the team goes in and looks for opportunities to make the website more efficient. Sometimes that's a redesign, sometimes it's not. But either way, the only time we do a redesign is if it would be more efficient and save more time and money to redesign it than it would take longer to modify and edit a really old broken website. So while the team is working on that, the research side of the team is also doing keyword research and content research to map out the content calendar that we'll then give to the content team. So about the same time, a couple weeks later, those are both done, and then we move into content. But so my two answers is one from an agency position, two from maybe a solopreneur or a listener's position. We always start with the content or the structure, because no matter how well you work on everything else, it's only going to be the effectiveness can be impacted by how good or bad your structure is. So you could do countless pieces of content upon content, but if your website takes 10 seconds to load, Google's probably never going to give people the opportunity to see your content because the website's so painful. A really simple way to think about SEO is who makes Google look good. And what I mean by that is if Google recommends a visitor to your website and it loads quickly and it has the answer, then that solves their problem, which makes Google look good. And that customer is probably going to come back and use Google again. If Google sends a visitor to your website and it loads slowly, they hit a broken link and you have poor content, that user had a bad experience. And if they have enough bad experiences, they're going to stop using Google. And then their ad revenue is going to decrease. And so they're not going to take the risk to send a visitor to a website that could negatively affect their reputation. So we start with structure, then move into content right after. Now, the second answer to that is for the listeners that don't understand technical structure updates and don't understand web design, and you don't have somebody to talk to help you with that, I would focus on content. You're either an expert at something and you're passionate about what you offer, or what you offer is the best in its market. And if it's not one of those two, then why are you selling it? And so you should either be the best or be the most passionate about it. And what you can do is use those, like that's your opportunity for content. You should be talking about those things, why you're passionate about, what's your story, why your product is the best, and focus on communicating that through, as kind of we talked about, unique value propositions, what's your story behind it, and why are you different than your competitors. So focus on content, but know that at some point you need to invest to have somebody fix your website structure, because then that amplifies all the content that you're putting out.
Yeah, there's been time come in and we've said, hey, well, we can start this ASAP, but you might want to fix, according to our audit, you've actually, this has been a lot slower than some of your other competitors or something like that. So even if they start producing content and making SEO optimizations, etc., they are going to probably rank a little bit more faster than you guys are, and so that scares them, right? So it's important to actually be quite transparent about what the repercussions are if they don't invest in that initial restructure, like you're saying. So do you, I know that we're in the interest of time, Damon. This has been super valuable already. Um, but I guess I have one question left, and then maybe you can make like a recommendation on a tool or something that you've been using recently that you're quite excited about. But what do you think defines success at the end of the day with a brand when they're competing at SEO? So when they're trying to implement SEO, what do you think they should be looking at as a North Star metric?
What I would identify as being able to claim a successful SEO campaign is when that brand shows up for non-branded search terms. So I got an interesting email the other day where somebody forwarded me and said, "Hey, have you seen what these guys are doing with SEO?" And what it was they were using, school as a platform. And so if you searched their branded name, their school forum. So school, if you're not familiar with school, it's a message board. It's a forum platform. An environment to maintain customer content, create community. It's kind of like Facebook groups, but
Mm-hmm.
you own the installation. Um, and so when you search this company's name, their school showed up. And so I wrote the person back and I said, that doesn't show good SEO. That shows horrible SEO because they don't rank for their own brand. And so if somebody searches a brand name, you should already own that results because it's your brand name. And if more importantly, if a customer searches your brand name, they already know who you are. So why are you optimizing for something for somebody that you already have as a customer? So the success is when your brand shows up for non-branded terms, that shows up for the phrases where people have a problem or need a solution and your product offers the solution to that, but they don't know your brand exists. And so the difference is unawareness in the brand. And so once you show up for those non-branded terms, then you can monetize and bring in a new customer that didn't know you existed before.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think you can set this ablaze here, but also to add to it, it's more like I've noticed that it's the keyword game in the beginning. So when I say that more like topic, I'd say the topical game rather than keyword game, simply because the more topics that are connected to one another that are linked to exactly the problem you solve, and when people are looking for it, the search engine is going to know that, hey, well, according to your semantics, you cover the most and you've got a credible brand. People seem to be enjoying your content, so you're going to get served this traffic, right? Um, Whereas if you don't, then it's one of those things where it, it makes no sense to even put any effort in it, right? Until you start sorting that out. So it's like, why would you even do that in the first place? So I totally understand that actually, that you should spend time.
Think about HubSpot. I mean, HubSpot shows up for everything, but it's all marketing content. So a lot of the content isn't about their product specifically,
Mm-hmm.
but they have communicated to search engines that they are an authority in the industry. And as you pointed out, all those topics, the topic may not be an exact match to what they sell, but in that topic, it has a small correlation to something that they do sell, and it links over to the greater piece of content that then further communicates to Google that they are the expert in the product that they sell. So they've focused on authority, and all of their pieces focus on what we talked about, which is solving customers' problems.
Yeah, and I agree. That's why I always say that the link, when someone brings up links first, I was like, you need to not worry about the links first. You need to first get exposure to the type of topics you're writing about, and then whatever you want to do, that's off the back end. I'm not a massive believer in link building, but that's just a point, I guess, because people sometimes focus on that before the keyword portion. And I'm saying, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no. You need exposure to the topical elements of your industry first before you start diving into link building. Because links are easy to get once you start working with other brands and doing content collaborations, things like that. Um, but yeah, I guess Damon, what's a tool you're really excited about right now, whether that's something you use in your daily business operation, your personal life, or even for SEO.
One tool on the SEO side that we've been using is most people are probably familiar with Answer the Public, but I found a website that is like that I like better, gives more detailed answers and goes deeper. It's called alsoasked.com. And so what that does is, if you're familiar with Answer the Public, you put in a phrase that you want to target and it tells you what people have already asked search engines about that. And that's the data that helps you understand what's in your customer's mind. But Answer the Public kind of gives this long statistical answer, and there's lists, but also Asked gives you the questions. So like with Answer the Public, you have to kind of figure out the questions and then create the questions around the data. Also Asked only gives you the questions. So it actually gives you full question format. And so it gives you more specific insights and greater quantities of insights that tell you what your customers are searching. So as we've talked about in this recording, that's what you want to focus on, is what are the customers already asking search engines, so you can get in front of the existing demand instead of just guessing.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I might have to check the also asked actually. Um, but yeah, no, this has been pretty good, Damon. It's been actually pretty cool to have you here. I think we can end up talking about SEO quite a lot, right? There's quite a bit to cover with the
Mm-hmm.
topic as a whole, so we could be here all day. But there we have it, everyone. With the difficulties businesses are facing these days, some of these SEO strategies today, they're going to be able to help you accelerate that growth, especially if you're going against those big media brands, and also if you're just starting out, right? Without having to spend any money on advertising. Um, SEO is great for long-term impact, we found, and Damon's also shared quite a few case studies on how we can actually implement SEO in a more impactful way and more effective right from the get-go. So it's been great to have you here, Damon. I think people can take some real actionable insights from here. Um, Damon, before we go, where can people read and follow you if they have had to ask you any questions? And also, with regards to your book, where can they find your book?
Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity to chat and share with your audience. If you go to damonburton.com, you can find everything on there. There's a link to all my social media accounts. There's a blog on there for my personal and business journeys, and then there's also a link on there to download my free SEO book.
Awesome. And I'll link in the description of where we distribute this episode so that you guys can find the course. So reach out to Damon if you have any questions. So yes, Damon, thank you for joining us today. It's been really good to have you on.
Yeah, been a pleasure. Glad to connect. Thanks, Neil.
Likewise. Thanks, guys. Take it easy.